My husband had divorce papers ready before I confessed my infertility, and 2 months later, he got my sister pregnant. He should have made sure it was his child. I'm not new to Reddit, but I am new at writing a story here. I always loved reading and hoped I would never have to write my own story. But here I am. I'm 30 years old and was married to Philip, who is the same age as me. After 3 years of marriage, we decided to start trying for a baby. I was always one of those women who wanted to have kids running around the house when they grew up. We started trying right away and were very optimistic, but month after month, nothing happened. After 2 years of trying, I had a feeling something was wrong. I suggested we see a doctor, but Philip wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea. He told me these things take time and not to worry too much. Still, I couldn't shake the urge to get answers. Finally, he agreed, and we both went for some tests. The news broke my heart. I had a condition that made it very difficult for me to become pregnant naturally. The doctor told me my chances of having a successful pregnancy were slim. All my dreams crumbled with a few words. I cried all the way home. Having to tell Philip this painful news cut deep. There was also my mother-in-law, Marta, who was always obsessed with the idea of having grandchildren. Every time she had the chance, she'd remind me when I was going to give her grandchildren. She was so eager to have some. That night, I sat down with Philip and Marta, who was visiting, and I spilled everything out. I could barely finish my explanation when Marta started sobbing dramatically as if she were the one who couldn't have children, not me. I think I felt worse than she did when I received that news. She didn't even ask how I felt. Philip didn't react at first. He didn't say much and stared into space for a while. I thought he was in shock and needed time to process it, but then he got up, left the room, and returned 10 minutes later with a stack of papers. Divorce papers at first. I thought maybe he had some generic forms lying around, something he grabbed in a fit of impulsive anger. But when I started reading them, they didn't seem to be that at all. They were detailed divorce papers he had already prepared, even notarized in some places. It hurt that he had those papers ready just in case. Philip must have been planning this, waiting for the moment he felt justified to use them. While I was worried about fertility treatments and looking for doctors to help us have a chance at becoming parents, he was meeting with a lawyer. He was ready to throw our marriage overboard as soon as things got complicated, without any discussion or commitment, just a way out. I'll never know exactly how long he had those papers or what was going through his mind while he kept them hidden. It felt like he was waiting for me to make a mistake so he could leave without feeling bad about it. Not even Marta bothered to explain or apologize. It was Marta who broke the silence, saying that it was for the best, that Philip deserved a chance at a complete family, and that I shouldn't stop him. I don't remember much of what happened next. Somehow, it all felt like a blur, and I packed up and left. Our marriage ended just like that, so quickly. During that time, I leaned heavily on my younger sister, Joan, who is 28. She was my lifeline, always asking how I was doing, bringing me food, and reminding me I deserved better. Though that was all a lie, because at the same time, she was betraying me. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, Joan called me with exciting news. She was pregnant. But something didn't feel right about it. She never mentioned the father. I didn't believe she was the kind of girl to sleep with someone for a one-night stand. I asked her who the father was, and after a bit of hesitation, she admitted it was Philip. She tried to use the excuse that things just happened between them during what she called a tough time in our lives. Yes, plural, because supposedly she was going through a tough time too. She said it wasn't planned, but their connection grew over time. Apparently, while I was drowning in pain from my infertility and struggling to hold myself together, they were comforting each other in bed because they were devastated over my divorce. There were more and more excuses, like these things happen, and she really tried, but she ended up telling me that they were now in love and planning to raise the baby together. That wasn't all. Life wanted to hit me with more punches because, until now, infertility, divorce, and betrayal weren't enough. It got worse. My parents sided with them, saying I wasn't with that man anymore, and it was my sister's turn to be happy. Of course, Marta was ecstatic. She threw a baby shower for Joan that rivaled a wedding and called her the daughter she always wanted. I couldn't take it anymore. I blocked them all. Philip, Joan, my parents, even Marta. I packed up and decided to start over. The first months were tough. I struggled to adjust, but therapy helped me a lot. Little by little, I started to regain my well-being. I got a new job, met wonderful people, and even started dating again. My boyfriend was a single dad with 2 kids, and they welcomed me into their family warmly. For the first time in a long time, I felt loved and appreciated for who I am, not for what I could offer. Then, after several months out of the blue, Philip reached out. It started with a text from an unknown number saying he wanted to talk and asked if we could meet. I ignored him. Then came the emails and phone calls. He eventually showed up at my workplace. I didn't want to see him. I asked him to leave, but he wasn't willing. So I told him I would call him when I got home, and I did. I called, only to find out that Joan's baby wasn't his. After months believing he was the father, Marta had him take a paternity test, and it proved otherwise. It turns out Joan had been seeing someone else, and that baby was his, not Philip's. Philip told me he made a mistake, that he let himself be blinded by pain and pressure from his mother. He said he realized he still loved me and wanted to make things right. He begged for a second chance, saying he couldn't move on knowing what he had lost. I let him talk, but I didn't say much. When he finished, I sent him a picture of me with my boyfriend and his kids. We were at the beach, smiling with our arms around each other. I told him I had found my family and deserved to be happy, a family that loved me for who I am, not for what I could or couldn't give. He fell silent and then tried to argue, saying it wasn't the same. I told him it was exactly the same, and I hung up. To make matters worse, my parents tried to contact me saying I should forgive them. They were still on his side and never really cared about me. I had built a life I was proud of, and I didn't feel I owed them anything. So my response to all of them is that they can go to the same place I think they belong. Update 1. A lot has happened in the last 2 weeks, and I thought I'd give you an update. Don't think I haven't read your messages. I have, and I've responded to some. It meant a lot that people commented on my post. If I'm going to be the protagonist of one of these stories, at least let it be one where people react anyway. Moving on to the update. About 2 weeks ago, I received a call from a new number, one that my parents or Philip hadn't used since they tried to contact me. It was Marta, on a mission to try to get me back with miserable Philip because, according to her, he was lonely and devastated after finding out that the child he was expecting wasn't his. She also said that maybe I didn't know this, but women can find forgiveness in their hearts. Then she brought up my infertility, saying it was time to accept reality and focus on being a good wife instead of holding grudges. It sounded like a plea from her, which I found quite funny coming from her. I made it clear that there was no way I would get back with Philip and that she really needed to stop playing games with me. So I ended the call in the middle of her speech about how Philip was good for me. When I did, I thought it would have been good to tell her that I wasn't equally concerned about our relationship when she helped him divorce me, so I called her back and said that before hanging up and blocking her. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't tell her. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it wasn't. My parents were also on the hunt for forgiveness from me and Joan, and their messages were along the lines of, "Well, it wasn't your ex's child, so that should count for something." Don't you think? Yes, it counts for something. It counts for the fact that she's even more of a whore than I thought. The last straw came just a few days ago. I was leaving work late one night when suddenly Joan appeared, frantic and exhausted. Before I could react, she started begging me for help. She said her life was falling apart and she needed her big sister. Apparently, the real father of her baby had left her, and she was at the lowest point in her life. She said she regretted everything and wanted to make amends. I told her maybe she should plan things better because when she doesn't plan, she sleeps with her sister's husband along with other men, then ends up pregnant and now is a single mother. It's clear that her strategy of being a loose woman wasn't working out. She ran out crying and quickly left the parking lot while I just stood there. Of course, my parents found out and called me the next day, furious. They told me it seemed like I was acting like a stranger instead of a family member, to which I told them that was exactly what I thought I was. I blocked them again. I don't understand how they have so many different phone numbers. Maybe they started a criminal organization when I left, which is why they have so many numbers at their disposal. I've finally become happy again, and they want to ruin it. It's like they've discovered my life is better without them, and they need to stop it as soon as possible. I've blocked them a million times, but they will keep looking for ways to bother me because that's how entitled people are. They think they have the right to betray you, hurt you, and even take away your happiness. It's time to take legal action. Update 2. I've been doing everything I can to block my ex, his mother, and my family from contacting me. I changed my phone number, blocked them on social media, and even told mutual contacts that I don't want updates about them. Despite all this, they keep finding ways to break into my life, and now they've dragged my boyfriend into their mess. We now have a restraining order against my ex. Let me start with the first problem. For a while, my boyfriend has been receiving really strange and creepy messages on his social media and emails. At first, he thought they were just spam or trolls bothering him. The messages started off relatively harmless, with vague things like, "Are you really sure about who you're with?" Or, "Would you wish you hadn't done that so soon?" But then they took a much darker turn. Some messages started to include details about me, things only someone from my past would know. One email mentioned the name of my childhood pet, a dog I haven't talked about in years. Another included the address of the house I grew up in. That's when my boyfriend realized this wasn't random. He didn't tell me at first because he didn't want to worry me, but when the messages started arriving daily, he finally showed them to me. This was beyond creepy. The person behind these messages had clearly done a deep dive into my life, and it was pretty obvious who it was, Philip or someone from his circle. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they became even scarier. Last week, Philip showed up at my boyfriend's workplace. Yes, you read that right. Somehow he found out where my boyfriend works. He entered the building and asked to speak with him. My boyfriend agreed to meet him in the lobby, thinking maybe Philip wanted to talk things out like adults. But of course, that wasn't what happened. According to my boyfriend, Philip launched into a long, delusional speech about how I still loved him and how my boyfriend was standing in the way of our supposed happy future together. Philip had the audacity to suggest that my boyfriend should break up with me for my own good, claiming I'd be better off with him. My boyfriend firmly told him to leave. That's when Philip's demeanor completely shifted. He became very aggressive, throwing out threats like, "You have no idea what I can do," and implying that he would make things difficult for my boyfriend if he didn't make the right decision, the decision of leaving me so I could be with him because there was nothing in the world he wanted more than to get back with his ex-stalker. Thankfully, my boyfriend immediately called security, and Philip was escorted out of the building. He told me about the incident as soon as he got home, and I could see how shaken he was. He didn't deserve to be dragged into this mess, especially not at his workplace. I contacted a lawyer, and I'm in the process of taking serious action. I don't know how Philip found out where my boyfriend works, but I'm determined to find out. My lawyer has advised me to document everything at this point because it's going to help build a case against him. I've also filed a police report, and am exploring getting a restraining order against Philip, even if it's just temporary. Philip is starting to show signs of being mentally unstable, which shouldn't surprise me if he's the kind of person who gets divorced based on what his mother has told him. But I think my family is even worse. Instead of being horrified by Philip's behavior, they are more concerned about Joan and that she's a single mom, as if I would drop everything to help her raise that baby. My mom recently sent me another email saying I need to stop trying to push away the people who love me. If these are the people who love me, I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me. My family has their beloved daughter, and it isn't me, so I consider myself familyless. They have nothing, absolutely nothing, that interests me right now. There's no appeal in being part of that family, none at all. It's like wanting to be a member of the Addams family, but with crazier members. I don't think that's an experience I want to go through. Update 3. I hope you're ready for a quick update. I have news about Joan that I think might interest you. I know if I were reading this story instead of being the protagonist, I would want to know it. Just a few days ago, I received a call from a mutual friend of Joan and me. Apparently, Joan has been completely missing for the last week and a half. She left her baby, my nephew, with our parents and hasn't contacted anyone since. From what I've been told, she didn't even leave a note explaining anything or saying when she would return. My parents are now in charge of the baby, and they aren't pleased with that idea because, at their age, they didn't expect to be caring for a newborn and changing diapers. What they expected was that I would probably do that in her place. The baby isn't mine, and everyone made sure to remind me of that time and time again when I was going through my divorce. So it's not my responsibility. I'd say it's my parents' responsibility since they have enabled this behavior from Joan. I don't know. Maybe telling my sister that sleeping with your sister's husband is wrong could have been a start. Perhaps giving her a smack in the face with a newspaper would have been a good idea. Just some ideas that come to mind right now, but I'm sure anyone would have modified this outcome. I am ready to receive comments saying I should take care of my sister's baby since I can't have my own. At least I shouldn't be such a bitter person making this about revenge. But if I wanted to take revenge on them, I would have been much harsher. I'm simply choosing to ignore them and let them deal with their own problems. Maybe I could use that newspaper smack technique on my parents, but with two old narcissistic dogs like them, there aren't many tricks I can teach them now. It's not even worth the newspaper, and besides, who buys a newspaper nowadays? I should get the digital version and use my tablet, though now that I think of it, that could hurt a little. That's still something I wouldn't do to a dog. But my parents constantly test me. Update 4. I have another one of those quick updates. It's been 2 weeks since my last post and Joan still hasn't shown up. It's time to call the animal shelter. As I mentioned in my last update, my parents have been trying to contact me constantly since Joan disappeared. I finally called them. I wanted to set boundaries and was determined to enforce them, no matter what happened. During the call, I made it clear that I'm not going to help them financially or emotionally, and I'm not training my sister who behaves like an unspayed street dog. I made it very clear that they need to stop bothering me and my boyfriend. No calls, no emails, and no involving mutual friends in the mess. If they break this condition even once, we will have a serious problem, and I hope they understand because I certainly used some words here that I'm afraid to use here since I've seen a lot of moderated posts over the years. To my surprise, they said they would stop bothering me. It will be interesting to see how long they stick to this, but it's never too late to ruin their lives if they keep bothering me. I don't know what I can do against them because it's not like a restraining order is going to affect them. I'm open to ideas at this point. Update 5. I don't have an update about my parents, but I do have one about Philip. Philip likes to surprise me, but never in a good way. Last week, Philip showed up at my house. It wasn't during the day or to have a reasonable discussion, but very late at night. Well, after 11 p.m. We weren't expecting anyone, at least not at that hour, so we were a little confused. My boyfriend checked the doorbell camera, and there was Philip sitting on the porch looking disoriented and exhausted as if he'd been aimlessly walking around before deciding to show up, maybe drunk too. We don't know how he figured out where we lived, but if he could go to my boyfriend's workplace, then I don't think this was very difficult. We didn't answer. I was angry and scared at the same time. My boyfriend suggested we wait to see if he would leave on his own, but he didn't. Instead, Philip stayed there. He didn't knock on the door again or shout or try to force his way in. He just sat on the porch as if he belonged there, looking out at the street. Thankfully, the kids were at my boyfriend's parents' house that day, so they were completely out of danger. The whole situation felt like something straight out of a horror movie. Our neighbors began to notice as well. Some reached out via text asking if we were okay or needed help. A few even commented on how unsettling it was to see a guy just sitting on our porch at such late hours. One neighbor with kids mentioned they were particularly anxious about how weird everything seemed. It didn't seem like Philip intended to leave anytime soon, which wasn't safe for us and wasn't fair to our neighbors who were now nervous too. So we decided to call the police. They took a while, but they arrived near midnight. When they did, they approached Philip and asked him to leave. He refused, telling them he just wanted to talk to me and that he wouldn't leave until he had the chance. That's when I mentioned the restraining order. The officers checked it on the spot, and his tone changed immediately. They wasted no time after that and made it clear he had violated the order and needed to leave the property immediately. When he still resisted, they removed him from the porch and warned him that further violations could result in more serious consequences. Since that incident, my boyfriend and I have taken additional steps to increase our home security. We're installing motion sensor lights, improving locks, and looking into a more advanced security system. It may be more, but with the kids here, it's important. I don't want to live in fear, but I also don't want to underestimate what Philip might do next. He knows full well about the restraining order we requested a while back and was aware of the consequences of showing up at my house, yet he still did. I feel like he's trying to prove that he can do whatever he wants, and that truly scares me. On top of that, I can't stop thinking about how this is affecting the neighbors. Philip is no longer just a threat to us, he's affecting other people too. One neighbor mentioned that they kept their kids inside the next day because they feared he would return. I don't think he could harm some strangers' kids, but I don't know if I can say the same about my boyfriend's kids. I'm grateful that the restraining order was in effect, but I'm also realizing it's not a magic solution. People like Philip, who don't think coherently, don't seem to care about these things. I've filed another police report, and my lawyer is focusing on making the restraining order stronger. We're also considering other legal actions to ensure Philip faces serious consequences if he does this again. With everything that's happened in the last few months, I was sure my boyfriend would decide to break up with me because he has 2 small kids. Who would want to put them in the middle of this drama? But he stood by me through all of this, and that's so much more than Philip ever did. Just imagine if things were reversed. Philip would have left me long before. His kids still love me a lot, and that's the sweetest part of all. I hope things calm down a bit for now. That's the best I can hope for at this moment. Update 6. Joan has reappeared, but that's not the most disturbing part of this update. I'm going to start with what's going on with Joan because the other part will be a bit longer and will make my sister's situation seem insignificant. My sister came back after a few months, which is when she ran out of money. As I expected, my parents welcomed her back with open arms. She wants to know why she doesn't want to seek child support from her baby's real father, something that would surely make things easier because she doesn't want to be a mother and isn't even sure if that person is the baby's father. My parents want her to stay, at least to be a mother for the baby, but she plans to leave again. But enough suspense. Let's talk about Philip. He attacked one of my coworkers at work. There are several branches of my company in the city, and for my job I can be in any of them depending on the tasks for the day. That day, I wasn't at the one he thought I would be. He tried to talk to one of my coworkers, and when she told him I wasn't there, he started demanding that she tell him where I was. She realized he wasn't a normal person or in his right mind and called security, but just as security was arriving, he attacked her because he thought she was protecting me, which, in a way, she was. Not only was he arrested for physically attacking my coworker, but because his intention was to break the restraining order again. We submitted all of this to my lawyer for what could be presented in court, along with other documents from his visit to my home. Can you believe that my mother-in-law tried to contact me to get me to withdraw the complaint and the restraining order? She did this because her son could spend time in prison, and he's not a gang member used to that kind of life. I told her nothing could matter less to me, and if they tried to pressure me there, even though technically it's impossible, I wouldn't care at all. I told her that this was her best chance of being a grandma right now, and that was saying a lot. I hope to have updates soon, but I don't think they will be very soon. My ex is locked up for now but is awaiting trial, which could take some months still. Update 7. I think this will be the conclusion of my story. I'll be able to come back just to read them. Though now I think I'll take a break from Reddit stories, or at least this kind because it brings back Vietnam memories. Joan ran away again, leaving my parents with my nephew. She didn't even tell them who the baby's father could be so they could try to chase down child support. The only thing I know, according to what my mother writes in some sporadic emails, is that at least they are free of lawsuits. As for me, she has moved and lives in another city where she found a job. They still expect that someday she'll come to her senses and want to be a mother, just that losing my ex has affected her, and that's why she can't be around her baby. Now, if I could tell my sister one thing, it's that losing him was the only good thing that has happened to her recently. As for Philip, he received 2 years for breaking the restraining order again with the intent to be violent, plus an additional 6 years for attacking my coworker, who obviously pressed charges against him and testified at his trial. Wow, she seemed even more willing to see him behind bars than I ever wanted. I think 8 years isn't bad, and it frees us from my ex. I attended his trial and ran into his mother, but she said nothing to me and couldn't even look me in the eye at any moment. If we run into each other here or on another subreddit, I hope it's not because of my story. I hope I've had my fill, and don't worry, No dogs were harmed during my story. I would never do that to a dog. But some of the people did deserve it.